Hello and welcome back to the Cheeky Rascals podcast. This week I'm joined with Stella Parkin. How are you, Stella?
I'm all good, thank you, Chloe, and thanks very much for having me today.
Of course. So we are going to be talking about Safer Sleep Week this week. And kind of in line with that, we're going to be talking about SIDS, also known as sudden infant death. This is a topic that it can be quite emotional for some people. If you have been affected by this episode, then we'll be leaving links down in our description box so that you can check out any of those links, particularly Lullaby Trust, so that you can reach the support if you do need it. Also, you don't have to listen to this episode. That's completely fine. Maybe one of our other episodes would be of more easier listening for you, and that's completely okay. But please do know that you're not alone. So there are trusts out there, such as the Lullaby Trust, that you can reach out to. So today I'm joined with Stella Parkin. Stella is a health visitor and qualified teacher. She joined the Lullaby Trust in 2016, where she has had a variety of roles promoting safer sleep advice and working with the public health professionals. Stella is currently the national lead for the Care of Next Infant programme, also known as CONI, the Lullaby Trust bereavement support programme for parents who are having another baby that is delivered in partnership with the NHS and other providers of health visiting services. She also leads on the development of training for practitioners working with families. So we are here to talk about SIDS, but first of all, I would like to kind of talk about the Lullaby Trust. So could you kind of succinctly sum up what is the Lullaby Trust mission?
Yes, no problem at all, Chloe. The Lullaby Trust is a charity, and our business is about saving babies' lives, but we also support bereaved families as well. So, our vision is to end all unexplained infant deaths, and for every family whose baby or young child has sadly died suddenly and unexpectedly, that they get the help that they need. So those are our kind of two main aims in our mission.
And how was the trust actually created? I think some people might like to hear a little bit more of the backstory actually behind the trust.
Yes, no problem at all. So we've been around a long time, so over 50 years now. So back in 1970, following the sudden death of her grandson, Nancy Hunter Gray gave a professor called Francis E. Camps £200 to hold a conference on what could have caused the death of her the seemingly healthy grandson. The following year, she then started up the Foundation for the Study of Infant Deaths, or FSID as it was known. So, over 50 years later, as the Lullaby Trust, we're still working with leading researchers and health professionals to try and save babies' lives and to support families impacted by sudden infant death.
And could you give a definition of what sudden infant death actually is?
Yes, so if a baby dies suddenly and unexpectedly, well, in fact, all children under the age of 18, then by law, a post mortem has to be carried out on that baby to try and find out why the baby has died. And in lots of cases, they find a cause of death. But where they can't find a cause of death after a thorough post mortem, then that's when a baby's death would be labelled sudden infant death syndrome.
Okay, and when I was doing a bit of research for this episode, and one of the questions that kind of commonly came up was, is SIDS hereditary? Is that something that you'll be able to shed a little bit more light on?
Well, unfortunately, we don't properly understand the mechanisms behind babies dying yet. So, research has revealed lots of things that perhaps could be linked, but not actually causes of that baby death. And so, we know that there are several factors involved, and those factors interplay on any given sleep for a baby. But we don't actually fully understand the mechanism behind what is actually happening to cause SIDS. So research is ongoing to try and understand more about the mechanisms underlying SIDS. So at this stage, we can't categorically say whether it's hereditary or not. but we know that unfortunately it's still common. It's much rarer than it used to be. So if we wind the clock back to the late 80s, early 90s, we had lots and lots of babies dying per year. We now have about 182 babies die every year. That doesn't sound many, but actually that's about 3 babies a week. And some of those baby deaths may well have been preventable by following safer sleep advice.
Do those statistics apply worldwide, or is that just here in the UK?
So that's just here in the UK. In other parts of the world, the statistics vary hugely. So we have areas such as the USA where the rates are much higher of babies dying suddenly and unexpectedly. And then we have other parts of the world where the SIDS rates are lower. And there are many factors that impact on that. It's quite difficult to compare SIDS rates around the world. Also, the data is collected differently in different parts of the world, and babies' deaths may be given a slightly different cause of death in other parts of the world as well. So there are various codes that are used when, unfortunately, anybody dies, and they're interpreted differently around the world. So it's difficult to compare country to country, really. So it's about making sure that, within the UK, we're driving down those rates of babies dying suddenly and unexpectedly as much as we possibly can.
Of course, and obviously it's a fantastic mission, and we're obviously so thankful in the UK and across the world as well for everyone that all the work that's put in to try and reduce it. Because, as you said, that is 3 babies a week who sadly are passing away. We are talking about Safer Sleep Week. Of course, you've highlighted that no sleep is safe. So, what is the safest position for a newborn to sleep in?
So our advice is for babies up to a year old, so not just newborn babies. So it's always putting a baby down to sleep, placing them on their back on a firm, flat, waterproof surface that is clear of anything. So toys, cot bumpers, pods, nests, comforters, anything else in that sleep space. So we know, one of our phrases is a clear cot is a safe cot. A baby, unfortunately, that's placed on its front to sleep is up to 6 times more likely to experience a SIDS death than one that's placed on their back. We also know that side sleeping isn't safe either. It's a very unstable position, putting a baby on its side, and it's unlikely that that baby would actually stay in that position. It's very easy for them to roll over onto their front. And so they should never also be propped in a side position. Don't put anything to wedge them. So always put that baby on its back. Um, we also suggest and advise strongly that a baby should be put at the end of the sleep space. So its feet, what we call feet to foot. So its feet are actually touching the end of the Moses basket, crib, cot, pram, wherever it's sleeping. So it actually can't wriggle down any further under any bedding. So that bedding doesn't go over the baby's head, overheat them, or give them problems with their breathing. So all sheets and blankets should be up to only shoulder height and be really firmly tucked in. So no loose bedding at all. We know that the head is a really important source of heat loss for a baby, and that a high proportion of babies that die as a result of SIDS are found with their heads covered with bedding. The most dangerous risk to take is to co-sleep on a sofa or an armchair. So that's where the risk of SIDS really increases, and it can increase up to 50 times compared to a baby sleeping in its own sleep space. So, if there's any chance that a parent or carer may drop off to sleep with a baby on a sofa or an armchair, then it's really about making sure that they pop that baby in somewhere else to sleep if they think they're going to nod off themselves. Because we know, holding a baby where they're asleep actually often makes you feel sleepy too, especially if you're, a mum that's been up all night or a dad that's been up all night. So having somewhere else to pop the baby if you think you're going to fall asleep as well is really important.
So what what do we do then if like children are obviously they do start to wriggle and as they start to get a little bit older, what do we then do if they are starting to roll on to their tummy during naps? How do we deal with that? Do we rejig them? Do we put them back into position? How do we deal with that?
So once a baby can move themselves from their back to their front and then back again, by themselves, we know that they'll find their own sleeping position. They'll once they're able to do that, then they can get themselves into the right position to sleep. However, to begin with, sometimes they can't roll themselves back again. So it might be to begin with, then you need to gently roll them, back onto their back. But we're not suggesting that parents or carers need to stay up all night watching their baby just in case they roll over. There are some things that parents and carers can do to help babies turn themselves back again more easily. And one of those things is having a really firm mattress that's designed to fit the cot, the crib, the pram, whatever it is, well, because we know that on a firm surface, babies can actually turn themselves more easily. So that can help them. The other thing that you can do with a baby to help their development is to give them plenty of tummy time. So when they're awake, give them opportunities to be on their tummy. That will help them with their development in making sure that they're starting to firm up those neck muscles, starting to strengthen them so that actually can help that process of rolling. But always supervise them, obviously, if they are laying on their tummies, even when they are awake.
And we kind of touched on in the previous question about I suppose there's this phrase that's kind of been coined as like a nap trap when baby falls asleep in a parent's arms and they can't necessarily do anything else. What advice would you then have for someone whose child has fallen asleep in their arms?
So, first of all, it's fine to have a cuddle, Don't feel that as soon as your baby's gone to sleep in your arms, oh my goodness, I can't cuddle them, I have to put them somewhere else. Um, If you're awake with your baby and your baby is in your arms asleep, then you're supervising them and you are watching them and you're making sure they're not overheating, etc. However, if you're beginning to feel sleepy as the parent or carer with your baby in your arms, then the best thing then is to pop them into their own separate sleep space as quickly as possible, because you can think, oh, I'm not going to fall asleep, I'm just feeling a bit sleepy, and the next thing you know, you have fallen asleep with that baby. And there's not only a risk of SIDS then, there's also a risk of accidents, babies falling on the floor or getting wedged between the adult and the back of a sofa or the arm of a chair. So pop them in at their own separate sleep space in the same room as the adult is for daytime naps as well as at night. So during the day, it's good idea if you can to have a Moses basket or a crib or carry cot or travel cot in the same area that the adults are. So whether that's the kitchen, sitting room, wherever it is in the home, because we know in that first 6 months of life, SIDS risk is at its highest. It doesn't mean that the parent or carer can't just nip out, to go to the loo or pop the kettle on. But it means that for most of the time, an adult is there where the sleeping baby is to be able to keep an eye on the baby and check they're not overheating, or, they've moved around and they've wriggled under the covers, or they've got wedged against, the cot, the crib, the Moses basket. So that's the best thing to do is, have a nice cuddle for a bit, keep an eye on the baby, and then pop them down into their own separate sleep space.
And then if, for example, someone is then placed their child into a swaddle and they
Yep.
happen to fall asleep into a swaddle, how can you ensure that they are sleeping safely in that?
So there's a few things to be mindful of. So never put a swaddle baby to sleep on their front or the side. So put them down to sleep on their back in the swaddle. Make sure that the swaddle material is preferably natural materials like cotton or muslin, something that's very thin. And importantly, don't put any blankets or additional bedding on top of that swaddle baby because the risk is around overheating. Make sure they're not overdressed under the swaddle as well, and that their head is uncovered and they don't have an infection or a fever. So if a baby does have a temperature, a fever, then it's not really a good idea to then swaddle them, because actually what you're trying to do is keep them cool, and the swaddle might actually make them hotter. Um, Keep checking them so they're not getting too hot. So check the back of their neck, for example. Make sure their baby's skin isn't feeling hot or sweaty or clammy. And if they are feeling like that, then take off some layers of clothing, basically, and perhaps unwrap the swaddle a little bit. Because the problem with overheating is we know that it's linked to a decrease in arousal when a baby is asleep. So babies and adults actually are programmed to wake up from sleep if there is something happening that could be a threat. So in this case, overheating, for example. And we know that if a baby gets too hot, that arousal mechanism can be suppressed. So we don't actually give advice about a specific TOG for swaddle products. So, if somebody's bought an actual branded product that's a swaddle, but what we advise to do is choose the lowest TOG that you can, if it's a product that's got a TOG rating. Shouldn't also swaddle tightly around the baby's hips either. So it is linked to developmental dysplasia of the hips. So make sure it's not swaddled too tightly, but it does need to be secure, because what we don't want is loose material that could potentially go over the baby's head, again, causing them to overheat or obstructing their breathing in some way. If it's a product, a swaddle product, then make sure if you're the parent or carer, you've read the product guidance really well. So some manufacturers say that actually you can't use their swaddle until the baby's a certain weight, for example, rather than an age. So always check the details and the guidance that that manufacturer has about, the swaddle. And then also stop swaddling. So that's with arms, wrapped inside the swaddle as soon as a baby shows sign of rolling, because a rolling baby in a swaddle finds it difficult to roll back onto its back again. So stop swaddling as soon as a baby starts to show signs of rolling.
And I was just thinking then, as you were saying about, particularly obviously about overheating, and there being this kind of understanding that that does have a contributing factor to SIDS. So in the winter months, obviously, hopefully we're starting to come out of ours now, but in the winter months, how can I ensure that my baby is warm enough that they are warm, but then also not worry about having the fear of overheating?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think lots of parents worry about that. So we advise to have a room thermometer and try and keep the temperature of the room where the baby is sleeping between 16 to 20 degrees. So it's a good idea to have a portable room thermometer, because different rooms in houses and homes and flats and wherever the family are living are different temperatures. So, one room could be much cooler than another. It's really difficult to judge temperature, and we all interpret temperature very differently. So having a room thermometer can really help with that and keeping that temperature, at the right range, really. And as I said before, keep checking baby. So check their chest or the back of their neck to see if they're feeling sweaty, clammy, hot. Hands and feet always feel colder, so they're not a good guide to feel a baby's hands or feet. It's always better to feel their chest or the back of their neck, really. And then take off layers or add layers accordingly. hopefully we might be heading towards the summer at some point. So I think that's when we get more questions usually coming into us is what do I do in the summer months to keep my baby cool? You can use a fan with a baby, but obviously don't position the fan directly onto the sleeping baby. Have it pointed elsewhere in the room so it's circulating the room, keeping that, air movement. You can also have windows open in the room where the baby's sleeping, but don't put the baby directly under the window either. Keep them away. And it could be, if it's really hot, goodness knows whether we'll get weather like that, but we sometimes do. We get 2 or 3 days, don't we, where it might hit 28 degrees or something. Then it might be that the baby needs to be only in a nappy and a vest on those days, or even just a nappy with lots of checking of that baby to make sure. I think also parents worry about newborns, don't they? And keeping newborn babies warm. Don't be tempted to put a hat on a baby indoors. So once a baby, a well baby, is fit for discharge home from hospital, if that's where the baby's been born, then that means that baby can regulate its own temperature. So even if a baby's had a hat on in hospital, once the baby comes home, they don't need to be wearing a hat indoors. Now, the only times that that would not apply is with perhaps a baby with a medical condition and it's a completely different scenario and that baby is under medical care at home and is having trouble regulating its own temperature. So in those instances, you need to take the advice of the health professionals, around the baby, including the pediatrician involved with that baby's care. But in general, as soon as babies come home, take off hats off of babies. Also, the same applies if a baby's been, out and about somewhere and is in outdoor clothing. Take the clothing off as soon as the baby comes indoors. I know parents are reluctant to do that if they've got a sleeping baby in a car seat. Um, but babies can overheat very quickly if they're in lots of outer layers and then they're in a plastic padded car seat. It can be tempting to leave your baby in there, sleeping in a sitting position, which we also know isn't advisable for its airway, and leave it in its outer clothing. So as soon as you get to your destination, take the baby out of the car seat, make sure it's not in its outer clothing, and it's even a good idea to remove outer clothing in the car, to be honest, because most babies do fall asleep in a car seat with the motion of the car, and cars can get quite hot, quite warm. So yeah, it's best preferably not to have the outer layers on, and then put them to sleep on a firm flat surface as soon as you can.
That's some brilliant advice there. There's loads to take in.
Yeah.
Um,
All of this advice is on our website. If you search car seats, if you search overheating, if you search swaddles, you'll find all this information on the website.
and we'll be linking that as well in our description, so everyone can
Great.
just tap on that and they can go directly to that website. Um, so we talked a little bit there about out and about, but obviously people are told to be really careful if they are sharing a bed with their baby. How can we ensure that we can do this as safely as possible if you do decide that this is what you would like to do?
Yes. So whether, parents have chosen to co-sleep or it's an unplanned scenario, we firstly have to think about there are certain situations which increase the risk of SIDS. So there are some key risks that parents should try and avoid. So co-sleeping is particularly dangerous if the parent or anyone else in the bed has recently drunk any alcohol, or they or anyone else in the bed smokes, even if they don't smoke in the bedroom. If they or anyone else in the bed has taken any drugs or medication that can make them feel sleepy or decrease their awareness, or if their baby was born prematurely, and by that we mean before 37 weeks, or their baby was a low birth weight, so 2.5 kilograms or 5.5 pounds when the baby was born. So if any of these scenarios apply, it's always best not to co-sleep and pop the baby in their own safe sleep space, such as a cot or Moses basket. However, if those risks don't apply on any given sleep occasion, then there are some things to make co-sleeping safer. So that's keeping adult pillows and adult bedding well away from the baby, or anything else that could cover the baby's head and cause them to overheat. As I said, we know that having head covering is a high risk factor for babies. Follow all the Lullaby Trust's other safer sleep advice to reduce the risk of SIDS, such as sleeping the baby on its back in the bed. And then to reduce other sorts of accidents, think about not bringing other children or pets into or onto the bed. Make sure that the baby can't be trapped, wedged, or fall out of the bed or get trapped between the mattress and the wall. Don't leave the baby ever unattended in an adult bed. I mean, I think lots of people think, babies don't move about, but they absolutely do. You can put them in one position and then come back later and find they've moved elsewhere. And what we really strongly advise is that if you are bed sharing, that you consider any risks before every sleep. So situations can change, can't they? So if you're unwell on a given night, you may well have a temperature yourself, or you might have, some sort of bug that you're up because you're vomiting, etc. Or if you've drunk any alcohol, so you might not normally be drinking alcohol, but you have, I don't know, a social gathering, friends over, and on that occasion, you've had a couple of drinks. And most of us don't really measure how much we're actually drinking in terms of alcohol. So if you are unwell, if you've drunk any alcohol, taken any prescription medication, taking any drugs, then in those instances, it's always better and safest for your baby to be in a separate sleep space. So cot, cribs, Moses basket, travel cots, anything like that would be safer for a baby on those occasions.
And obviously, we've talked about Safer Sleep Week. Do you kind of have any final tips that you could give us about reducing the risks of SIDS?
Well, I think one really important thing, and I think people don't necessarily consider it safe asleep, is smoking. It's a really important consideration in terms of SIDS. So we know that, unfortunately, smoking cigarettes during pregnancy or after birth can significantly increase the chance of SIDS. We know that there's lots of scientific evidence that shows that around 30% of sudden infant deaths could be avoided if mums didn't smoke when they were pregnant. If you take that together with the risks of smoking around a baby at home, so secondhand smoking, then it means that smoking could be linked to 60% of sudden infant deaths. So if mum and mum's partner could try not to smoke during her pregnancy and after the baby is born, that would be fantastic. It's also about keeping babies out of smoky areas. Public places, we now have legislation in place. So, you're not taking your baby really into a smoky cafe anymore. However, you may go to other people's homes or grandparents or friends where they are smokers. So it's thinking ahead about, actually, do I want to take my baby into that environment? Can I talk to those individuals and ask them not to smoke while we're visiting, or could they come and visit us instead? So don't let your baby near smoky situations. Keep your home and your car and anywhere else that the baby spends time smoke free. So it's about kind of spreading that information as well, isn't it, to your close friends and family. Also, if mum or partner is a smoker, then don't share a bed with the baby, as we talked about a moment ago, because unfortunately that does increase the risk of SIDS, even if they're not smoking in the bedroom. So smoking is a massive part of SIDS, unfortunately. So if mums to be can stop smoking, that's great. And then after baby's born, that would be so fantastic in terms of driving down SIDS rates even further.
That's really interesting. You're completely correct there. I hadn't thought of smoking. I knew that that was a factor, but I hadn't thought of that
Mm.
as being, especially talking about safer sleep. When you said there about the it being during pregnancy, about a mother's potentially smoking during pregnancy, is that dependent on trimester? Is that if she was to smoke, in those first initial weeks when she found out she was pregnant, or is that also dependent on smoking throughout pregnancy?
It's throughout pregnancy.
Right. Okay.
There are other risks to baby of smoking as well, but in terms of SIDS, it's really as soon as mum finds out she's pregnant, it would be ideal if she could stop smoking, or if it's a planned pregnancy, trying to give up prior to becoming pregnant, that would be great. And of course, there's huge health benefits for both mum and baby for mum not smoking. But it's tricky. It's not easy to give up smoking. It would be flippant of me to say just stop. It's hard, but there's lots of support out there to be able to stop smoking, and there are lots of health professionals that can help and advise as well. So yeah, have a look at our website. If you're thinking about having a baby, or you're pregnant, or you've just had a baby, then have a look at our pages around smoking. And there's lots of advice about organisations, particularly the NHS, that can support both mum and anybody around mum who wants to give up smoking. But yeah, it is a thing that people don't kind of associate with safer sleep, but it is part of our core safer sleep messaging because we know it's so impactful on the SIDS rates.
And we are going to have to come to a close, unfortunately. I do really hope that this podcast has helped. I've definitely learned so much just talking to you in this short space of time. But as we said, if you would like to find out a little bit more about SIDS, or you would like to reach out to the Lullaby Trust, we'll be linking them in the description so you can find all of their information there. Um, as I said, we are going to have to come to a close, but I do have one final question for
Yeah,
you. My last question is, if you could give one tip to any parent, whether they've just had a baby or they're expecting, what would that tip be?
I think it has to be always place the baby on their back to sleep. Even when a baby is moving around, is able to roll, change its position, always start every sleep by placing that baby on its back, feet to foot, preferably in its own sleep space. I think would be, the main messaging that we'd like to get across. Because we know in other situations, whether the baby is on its tummy or its side, we know that increases the risks of SIDS. And we also know that babies sleeping in sitting positions, so whether that be in bouncy chairs or in car seats or in other situations, there's more risks to that baby's airway. So placing babies on their back to sleep is the number one message. And, if the baby has fallen asleep in a car seat, when you reach your destination, take that baby out and pop them somewhere flat to sleep on its back.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Stella, and a wider thank you also to the Lullaby Trust, not only for all the work that they do, but also obviously for helping us to arrange this podcast. And hopefully, we'll be able to get that messaging out there, kind of around safer sleep and also around SIDS, especially that smoking. That's something that I've really taken
Mm,
a key part away from this podcast episode, is the impact of smoking on SIDS.
yeah.
Um, so thank you so much for joining me today. If you would like to find anything from the Lullaby Trust, as we highlighted throughout this episode, you'll be able to find that in our description. You'll also be able to find out a little bit more from us at Cheeky Rascals. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to also know about some more of the things that we've talked about, for example, we've talked about postpartum fitness, and we've also talked about feeding choices with experts from all across the UK. Then please do check out our other episodes. And if you enjoy them, then please leave a 5-star review, because it really does help us. And it also lets us know that you've enjoyed the episode and you'd like to learn a bit more about it. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks very much, Chloe, for having me. And yeah, hopefully people will find the podcast useful and the information on our website. So yeah, thank you very much.